Welcome to our last and closing session for today's Sustainability and Action Summit. I'm very excited to join you and also be accompanied by Dr. Shweta Chakraborty, who is a noted and well-authored risk and behavioral scientist. And hopefully she can illuminate some of the thoughts on our minds about how we manage risk, urgency, and our own behaviors with respect to some of these tectonic issues that we've been talking about today. So first, let me welcome you, Dr. Chakraborty. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, I guess we're both actually, we were saying we're both in Washington, D.C. today, but in different places. I see you're husbanding the planet there, which is a nice background and context for what we're talking about.
That's right. I'm not in DC. I'm floating in space, you see.
Yeah, you are. I'm on a marsh outside of Virginia.
Right.
But listen, thank you for joining us. And you have a unique perspective. You came from academia, and I wanted to first, before we get into some of the issues that are on the minds of the viewers here today, how did you transition from that to being a risk and behavioral scientist, especially on this topic here?
Yeah, so I started as a risk and behavioral scientist. I was fascinated by the field. There is so much application that is yet to be seen. And I studied this 20 years ago, over 20 years ago is when I started studying behavioral science. And we're still just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of applying some of the findings from this field. And so when I first got into behavioral science, I was applying it to improving patient outcomes and seeing how patients actually make decisions that are not always aligned to their best health outcomes. And why don't patients listen to doctors, despite doctors being experts on ensuring the best outcomes? And I was fascinated by that. And so getting into it and understanding the brain and how information is processed, and based on that, how decisions are made in line to the best interests and outcomes versus not, what influences patients to make decisions that might actually result in worse outcomes, I started realizing that there's applications of this outside of healthcare. And then around the same time of finishing my doctorate, I learned about the climate crisis. And it's one of those things, once you know what's happening to the planet, it's the penny drops and you really can't think about anything else. And I knew I had to contribute the advances in behavioral science to the climate crisis. And that could be my little impact on improving behavioral outcomes and individual decision-making to align to the best science, the consensus that we have on what is happening with the planet and how we overcome some of these challenges. So that's how I took the field and moved it from healthcare to the environment. And I've been working in it ever since. It's been over 15 years now. Don't want to give away my age though.
Well, I mean, you bring a unique angle and lens to this topic. Now, how would you apply this sort of risk philosophy and perspective to climate change in particular? I mean, it's a distant risk, but people look at it in different ways.
All right, so people don't make the best decisions for themselves. It's not that they don't want to, it's that we are wired to actually be influenced by cues from the environment that actually have nothing to do with the decision at hand. This is true for our personal decisions around our health, and it's true for wider societal decisions around how we interact with one another and the environment. And so let me give you an example, because I have to convince you of this, because people really think that they are making the best decisions from themselves. Ask anyone in your family. This is one of those things that I know people are nodding, thinking that I know others who make bad decisions for themselves, but I make the right decisions. No, nobody is immune to this. We are all intrinsically wired to think like our ancestors did, which was they would see a snake, that would be a risk, or see a tiger, and they would be hardwired to respond to cues in the environment, like what is the stance of the snake, how close is the tiger, are there any other animals around? And based on those different environmental cues, the decision would be made to hopefully jumpstart the response system and run away. We're probably not related to our ancestors who didn't do that, right? So we are still very much wired to respond that way to the risks around us. And the risks around us are the ones that we see, the ones that are tangible, the ones that are visible. So we are less inclined to think about and respond to risks that are invisible, seemingly far away, or slow moving. And climate change checks every single one of those boxes, right? Which is why we see or have seen the struggle to really convince the swaths of people that we need to get that groundswell of action. So let me, and I'm sure that especially this audience can understand and agree with that. And then let's just look at how deep this goes, because it really, if it was that simple, just to say, okay, well, we know what the issue is, how do we now overcome it? Well, it's a challenge, and here's how ingrained the challenge is. So let me give you an example, Alex. I'm going to bring you into this, and there's no right or wrong answer. This is really just an illustration of how we think about the different ways information is presented to us. Okay, so I'm going to give you a scenario. This is scenario one. You are on your way to the movies and you have a $20 movie ticket. And this just goes to show how long it's been since I've been to a movie theater. I believe the ticket is still worth about $20. So you have a $20 movie ticket in your wallet and you're on your way to the movie theater, and you realize when you get to the movie theater that you've lost the ticket. So it was an actual movie ticket. And I know, of course, now we don't have to actually buy physical movie tickets. So without asking any of those questions, do you buy another movie ticket to go see this movie? Yes or no?
I guess so. I made the trip over there, and it's probably something valuable, and I want to do it. Probably.
Okay. So then same scenario. You have $20 in your wallet. You're on your way to the movie theater. You get to the counter. You've lost your $20 bill. Do you still take out another $20 bill to go and see the movie?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Another scenario.
I lost it, though. You said I lost it, so I have no money, right? I have no money to buy the ticket.
You might have more money, but so it's you lost a ticket, the actual ticket, versus you lost a $20 bill. Does your decision change? If it's a ticket versus a $20 bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I really want to do it, I'll probably, if I really have my heart set on seeing the latest Avengers movie, I probably will find one way to get through it, use a ticket or the cash.
Okay. No.
The ticket is more of a commitment. You're probably right. The ticket's more of a real commitment.
Okay. And then another scenario. So there's a lamp you really like, and there's a store next door to you, and you can buy the lamp next door for $40. And the same exact lamp is half off across town. So without thinking about like how to get across town, how much a train would cost or a car would cost or walking, you know that the same lamp is $20 across town, half off. Do you make the trek to go buy the lamp half off across town or no?
Yeah, I'm probably a bad shopper. I'll just buy it right across the street from me, right next to me, and get the sure thing.
Okay. And then there's a car. It's an electric car. Let's call it an electric car. And it's $50,000, and you can buy it next door. Or the same car in the dealership across town is $14,980. So $20 discount across town for this electric car. What do you do?
Yeah, I'd probably buy the one that's right next to me. That's not worth it. The discount's not worth it. Yeah.
You are officially rational. You have answered rationally.
Say that.
You have answered rationally across all of these scenarios. I ask you and the audience who's paying attention to this talk today to try these on their friends and family and see if the answers are consistent. So there's no right or wrong answer across either of these, right? Whether you're going to buy the ticket or whether you lose the actual ticket or the $20 bill versus not, the answer should just be the same. It shouldn't change if we change the ticket to the bill or the bill back to the ticket. Same thing for the lamp versus the car. The answer should be the same, whether you are going to buy the car next door or make the effort to go across town. Regardless, it should be the same answer. But what we find, what most people say is that, well, in the form of the ticket, no, I'm not going to buy it again. Or I'm sorry, in the form of the ticket, I will buy it again because yes, I've allocated that $20 to the movie versus otherwise. And then with the lamp versus car, most people will go across town to buy the lamp, but would not go across town to buy the car. Because when something is half off, it's viewed as, okay, well, that's half off. Of course, I'm going to make the effort to do that. But if it's $20 off of something that's framed as $50,000, that just seems like $20 not worth it. But it's the same $20 across every scenario. It's the same $20 if it's framed as a $50,000 car versus a $40 lamp versus a $20 ticket versus a $20 bill. It's the same value, and yet just adjusting the scenarios around the value will change people's decision-making behavior. You will find that most people will have different answers across these scenarios, and that is classic everyday irrationality. And it's what humans, and so Alex, you do not fall into this category, which is great, but most humans do. We really are influenced by just a slight change in different contexts and cues. And this is the kind of thing that is good for human beings, in the sense that it's gotten us this far. We have been able to set up society. We've been able to interact with one another, create trade and deals and bargaining and trust and all of that that's needed to propel society and progress forward. But it can impact us negatively when it comes to aligning our actual priorities to the realities of the risks we face today. Because basically, our risk landscape has changed so rapidly from that of our ancestors. We no longer have to worry about getting out of the way of a snake. We now have to worry about much more existential risks. What is the future of nuclear war? What is the future of climate change and its impacts? What is AI going to look like? These risks are not natural for us to contend with, because that's not how we are wired. Again, the way we're wired has really worked out well for us, but not in the sense of needing to now align our perceptions and how we're influenced to the reality of the risks that we face. We have limited resources, and we need to make sure that the time and attention and personnel is accurately aligned to the base rate statistics of the realities of hurricanes occurring, flooding increasing, sea level rise. All of those things have to better align. So we need to overcome our innate wiring to make sure that we are making rational choices around how we prioritize our limited resources.
But now, Shetta, how do we apply that to, like you say, this existential issue on the planet side, this climate survivability? It's a distant risk. It's a huge tectonic shift in thinking, but it's a ways out, or maybe it's accelerating, as people have noted. How do we change that risk profile so people have more urgency and more rationality as well in how we look at this overhang?
Great question. And I've been working in climate now for years, and I've seen the change in terms of the success of being able to get the risk on people's radars. And for better or worse, much of it has to do with the fact that we're living in it. It doesn't take a lot to reach for an example of a climate change impact anywhere in the world, really. Really, nobody is immune from being impacted by climate. And so some sooner than others. Vulnerable populations have already been experiencing impacts, and we're seeing this increasing across all of the different categories, from increased wildfires to increased hurricanes. We're going to see increased frequency and intensity of these different impacts, and we're going to see them happen simultaneously. And we see the struggles this means in the United States, but around the globe, for different federal bodies. In the US, it's FEMA, that is really looking to provide relief and recovery after an impact. And there's only so much we can allocate for that. It's much better for us to proactively prepare to minimize the amount needed for relief and recovery after an impact. But people are still resistant. People are resistant to supporting, let's say, $100 million of resources up front to protect a community from the impacts of climate change versus the demand for cleanup efforts after the fact. And how do we make that shift? How do we get the public to support what resources need to be allocated up front so that the impact of the disaster is minimal as it can be anyway? Because we know the science is very clear. We know that these impacts are going to increase. The most recent IPCC report said climate change is unequivocally human caused, and the impacts that were stated are very scary. They're absolutely scary. We know that we're not on track to actually keep the planet to below 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by the end of the century. In fact, and this might come out as a surprise to some of your audience, but we're actually on track to increase carbon emissions globally by 16% by 2030. So despite all of the awareness, despite the increasing amount of impacts that we are facing in the United States and around the world, we are still not seeing a broad, widespread shift in behavior and policy to align to the reality of the science so we can mitigate against those worst case impacts. So we need to prepare for impacts we know are coming, because we have the evidence that we are locked in, and adapt to that new reality of increased impacts around the world that are going to be happening simultaneously. And at the same time, we need to mitigate against worser case scenarios. Because right now, if we do everything in our power, we can actually max out at 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We can stabilize there. It's still within our grasp. But the trajectory we're on needs to be immediately shifted. The 16% emissions rise by 2030 cannot be the path we're on to stay at the different benchmarks that has been very clearly stated by the UN. So how do we actually, your question is, how do we actually get people to think about it? Well, the reality is that people are facing it. We can do better in telling stories. So how do we really showcase what people on the front lines are experiencing and make that more relevant and tangible to those who might not have experienced a climate change impact yet? So making these narratives really relevant will bring that urgency and will bring that need for people to act and to do something, to adapt and mitigate, two things that everyone can do. And we can get into actual steps to take. So telling stories better, but telling stories in a way that is truly conducive to the existing perspectives and narratives that people already have in their brains. So what we refer to as mental models, we need to take the time to understand who are audiences that we're communicating to. What are the existing mental models they have? What are the existing perceptions, schemas? All these words are interchangeable, right? And we need to understand what is influencing these narratives. Is it their political identity? Is it their culture? Is it their religion? Is it their work? Is it their identity is for what they do for a living? So taking the time to understanding the existing perspectives within somebody and then crafting a story and a narrative to be able to resonate with what is already existing within somebody, that goes a long way. We don't take the time to do that enough. Usually communication is just here's a drop down of information and you hope that it's being received as intended. Taking the time to do what we call risk perception research to understand what people are scared of, what's influencing them, what they're not worried about that they need to be worried about, that can go a really long way in succeeding in seeing the intended outcome from the communication. You don't want to just tell people something. You want to see an action be taken from it. So we can predict those behavioral outcomes to be better aligned to the science if we take the time to understand what these existing mental models are in the audiences that we're attempting to communicate to. So that's one. Better communication that's really entrenched in risk perception research, and the strategic communication comes from that. The two additional things, and then I will stop on the comms part of this for the moment. So the two additional things is we need to individually be responsible. This is something every individual can do, is to be aware of the different cues that are influencing perceptions. So am I overreacting to something or underreacting to something? I'm overreacting usually because the media might be perpetuating a particular risk. Let me give you an example. Shark attacks. How many, Alex, you've already proven to be very rational, but I'm going to try this on you anyway. What occurs more frequently? Shark attacks, and I mean globally, shark attacks or radon gas, deaths caused by radon gas?
I go with shark attacks. I hear about them more.
Right. So thank you for playing into that.
I had a feeling you're going to leave.
Yeah. But those of you listening, try this. Try this with your colleagues. Try this with your family. Ask them, what kills more people? Shark attacks or radon gas? And people will most likely say shark attacks because you do hear about it more. It's more salient. And for that reason, you can attribute more frequency and probability to that particular risk occurring, even though the reality is that that's not true. Shark attacks kill in the single digits of humans every year versus radon gas, which is the second leading cause of lung cancer. And kills just in the United States about 20,000 Americans every year. So it's a significant difference in terms of which risk is more of a risk. And yet the public, because of the media and various other cognitive biases, like how salient is something, how sensational is something. Shark attacks have been made really terrifying from movies like Jaws, and Hollywood has a big role to play in the different perceptions of risk as well. People are probably more scared about asteroids than they need to be. So those are the kinds of cognitive biases to pay attention to and look out for. That's what individuals can do. So I one of my biggest asks of those who ask me, what can I do? Well, how do you overcome your own cognitive biases? Pay attention. When you are presented with something and you have a decision or a feeling towards it, where did that judgment just come from? Why do we still make snap judgments? If I see somebody walking down the street wearing a red hat, and it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative or a Trump supporter or not a Trump supporter, why was the immediate perception that came to mind MAGA supporter? And do you feel positive about it or negative? That depends on where you fall on the spectrum, sure. But pay attention to why that perception arose, that red hat must be MAGA versus actually, if you look at the base rate statistics, there's red hats that are aligned to many other associations and brands than just a MAGA supporter, right? So pay attention to where your judgments are coming from, and take time, do a little bit of research, actually get the base rate statistics and compare and contrast. Were you right? Were you wrong? That will help you become better calibrated. So that will help us get more rational. So that's step 2. And the final point I'll make on how to better align perception to reality, right? So as communications professionals, are tasked to make sure that they are better aligning communications to the existing mental models and their audiences. That was point 1. Point 2 is we as individuals can really make an effort to overcome our cognitive biases by paying attention to them and comparing and contrasting our perceptions and our overreaction or underreaction to the actual base rate statistics of these risks. And the last thing, and this is really for those that are in policy or in regulation, is to create better choice landscapes for people. So if we know that we need people to switch to clean energy, make clean energy the default option, and make it harder for people to actually source energy from dirty sources. And so if we can actually create a better decision-making landscape, then naturally people will default to a better decision, because human beings, and again, I'm not knocking humans, I'm part of this category, but humans are cognitively lazy. And so it's easier for us to just kind of go with what the default is rather than having to opt out of it and opt into a better choice. So we can also create a better choice landscape for people to naturally fall into making decisions that are aligned with science, that are aligned with data. So these are the 3 things that can really help close that perception and reality gap as it relates to climate.
Yeah, I mean, I think you emphasize a really important point, which is we have to meet people where they are to take them on this change journey. And in this example, we're talking about sustainability in the long run, scope 1, 2, 3, things that you can change, things that you can't change, things that you can influence. And I think those are some good lessons there. You've answered some of the questions I had about the magic wand. If you had a magic wand, what would you change about people's mindset? And I do want to open it up to the audience for some questions, but I had one last question around companies and their level of commitment and transparency around this. We all on this call, most of us work in a company which is embedded in communities, and we have individuals who are very passionate about this topic. But there is often a credibility gap, an execution gap, a commitment gap. You can call it greenwashing, you can call it anything you want, but there is a feeling that integrity behind the commitment and actually taking it to the action itself and the outcome is lacking. And to your point about over communicating or over indexing on the fear, even there's a backlash against that. You're overstating it. That's just realistic. It's too far out. What counsel would you have for some of us who are working in companies who can be a platform for change to close that gap, to be more authentic around their commitments, which are pretty significant?
No, absolutely. And I love this question. And I get asked about greenwashing a lot. And I would actually point to something that I think could even be considered worse than greenwashing, right? Because companies are seeing the writing on the wall, and there's some bad actors, but mostly companies are made up of employees, and employees are humans, and humans have a vested interest in ushering in a brighter, better, more breathable, more equitable future for themselves, their families, their communities. And we need to remember that we have dual identities. We are citizens of this planet, and we're also employees of various different organizations. And people are, I do believe, innately good and are looking to do the right thing. And we can help create those opportunities as companies. We can help create those opportunities to support employees doing the right thing, making better decisions, to really secure their futures and those of their families and communities. So we have to remember that the writing is on the wall. Most companies see it, and there's leaders in different sectors like Kearney and management consulting that are really leading the charge. Now, a bigger risk for a company like Kearney and other companies is what I refer to as green hushing. So I would say it's even worse than greenwashing, which when you're doing really great climate action and it's not being communicated, because we need to communicate. And not to say that Kearney's not communicating, but what I mean is the risk is not sharing what is really good work that's underway by your company and by your employees, so to inspire others in the sector and to actually see those ripple effects throughout society. And green hushing, we argue, is worse than greenwashing, because we need to be able to lead with the positive. Let's lead with here are the efforts that are truly underway, and let's be proud of it. Let's actually proclaim it. Let's talk about it. These are the kinds of things that we need to get into the global societal consciousness, that in the same breath that we talk about pop culture and sports, we need to talk about climate. And we need to talk about climate in a very positive, solution-oriented way. So yes, it's scary, and we can't sugarcoat the reality of what we're facing. We need to call the risk what it is to be able to truly overcome it. We need to say, this is what we are going to be facing. This is what's coming our way. But for us to really mobilize action and to truly overcome it, we need to provide tangible, actionable next steps. We need to showcase the good work that's already happening and that's underway. And we need to then be able to create a collective to really move towards what still needs to be done. And that's what the risk, if we green hush, that's the risk that we run, is that won't happen. So I would say that we continue. What my recommendation for Kearney and other companies that are truly leaders in solutions to the climate crisis as a company is to really blast what you're doing and really use the tools that are available to communicate the solutions. It will inspire and it'll give people hope, because it's that combination of, yes, fear, we've got this scary thing coming our way, but we're hopeful, and these are tangible next steps that we can take. That is how behaviorally we will really move people to act and mobilize, not ignore, not immobilize, not stick their head in the sand, but truly to act. And the different tools to be able to move this type of action forward is, one is a platform called the We Don't Have Time platform. It's free to use. Individuals and employees can go on right now. It's called We Don't Have Time. And it's like a global social network where you can see the good work that companies are doing. And as an employee, you can connect with other employees in similar initiatives around the world and amplify, really share the solutions that are underway and amplify and accelerate the adoption of these solutions worldwide. So there's a lot of opportunity here to forget greenwashing, and where that's happening, different groups will call companies out on it, but let's focus on improving on green hushing. Let's really communicate our good climate actions and solutions to the world.
I mean, I think there's a great deal of practicality in what you advise us on, and there's a great deal of course, passion and empowerment as part of your themes. And so I think we at Kearney also are fully behind that. I know our audience is also very excited about these themes, and we've offered during the course of the day to make sure that we can answer questions offline or online here, and we might be running out of time for actual live questions. But I wanted to give you the last word again, Dr. Chakraborty. Again, if you have the magic wand, what else would you like to see happen so that we can affect the real change that we all want on this topic? Really take sustainability in action and make it happen.
I would say that I really do have a positive view of the future, and people need to remember that. So this is not hopeless at all. We have human ingenuity. We have our expertise to provide as employees of our various companies. We have management consultants who are some of the smartest people I've ever come across that are real problem solvers. It's our nature to overcome these challenges that we face throughout the history of the human species. This is not something we can't overcome, and people need to remember that. That's a major takeaway, is that we can actually envision a future that is better than had climate change not happened. It's actually better in the sense that we will have cleaner air. We will have we will have a infrastructure that is truly sustainable, and we will have equitability at the heart of it all. And that's such a beautiful, promising future that those who have been historically left behind, that have been historically disenfranchised, can actually be part of building this new, brighter, cleaner future. And that needs to be at the center of every solution that is put forward. We're seeing that in the United States. President Biden, through executive order, included the Justice 40 framework. So all federal investment towards a clean energy transition would result in returns to those who have been historically disenfranchised. That is American leadership. And this is what companies like Kearney are also, I know, very much about. Equitability has to be at the center of these solutions. And if we continue to ensure that and to lead with that, and to not green hush, but really use the different tools to communicate that and get that out to our peers around the world, then we can start to see equitability being part of solutions outside of the United States, all over the world. So I just want to leave your audience with that this really is an opportunity to create a future that is much, much more just.
Well, thanks very much for that positive final note. And I want to thank you on behalf of everyone attending for your brilliant insights, Dr. Chakraborty, and I wish you well. I'll see you in person soon, I hope, as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Very good.